cop checks an empty highway. At 3 a.m., what crosses the road is not human. Officer John Reyes had been with the Nevada Highway Patrol for 14 years. In that time, he'd seen just about everything that could happen on a stretch of open road. Horrific accidents, drunk drivers, weaving across lanes, even the occasional dust storm that swallowed the highway whole. But nothing prepared him for the events that transpired on a moonless night along Route 50. A span of asphalt so desolate it had earned the name the loneliest road in America. It was nearing the end of his shift, close to 3 a.m., when his headlights cut a narrow path through what felt like an endless void of blackness. On the best of nights, this stretch of Route 50 was eerily quiet. No streetlights glowed along the roadside, and no towns lit the horizon for miles. The few vehicles that ventured out here after midnight were usually truckers hauling freight or the rare lost tourist. But as Reyes navigated the cruiser along the gently curving asphalt, he was struck by an oppressive silence that made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. The night sky was a thick canvas of cloud, not a single star poked through. The cruiser's headlights, bright as they were, seemed swallowed by the inky blackness, no more than a dozen yards ahead, as though the night itself resisted illumination. He switched off his radio some time ago, because the static hissing in and out only served to remind him how alone he was out here. Occasionally he'd flick the dial, hoping to catch a dispatch call or the faint echo of a music station, but the signal was too weak. The static had been grating on his nerves, an auditory reminder that beyond the glass of his cruiser, the desert was a silent, empty realm. As he rounded a gradual bend, he glanced at the clock on his dashboard, 2:57 a.m. Another slow hour, and he'd be clocking out, heading back to the station, where the fluorescent lights and coffee machines stood in sharp contrast to this pitch-black wilderness. Reyes remembered the rumors he'd heard both from local legend and from chatter among the older officers who'd spent their careers patrolling these roads. There were tall tales of spectral hitchhikers who vanished once picked up phantom semis that never appeared on radar, and even wilder stories that sounded more like conspiracy theories. But Reyes wasn't the sort to scare easily. He had chalked up most strange sightings to fatigue or overactive imaginations. Yet there was something in the air tonight, something he couldn't quite place. The atmosphere felt heavier than usual. It wasn't the first time he'd driven Route 50 in the dead of night, but it was the first time he felt truly uneasy. Perhaps it was the fact that no vehicles had passed him in either direction for nearly 2 hours, or the way the wind occasionally buffeted his cruiser, making the battered road signs clatter like bones. Whatever it was, each mile that ticked by on his odometer brought a more pronounced sense of dread, an undercurrent of tension that made his pulse quicken. He was a seasoned officer, trained to remain calm under pressure. He'd responded to bar fights that ended in gunfire, performed roadside interventions with armed suspects, and even talked down a jumper from a highway overpass. Fear wasn't foreign to him, but he was adept at containing it. Still, a trickle of anxiety now slipped past his defenses, and he found himself tapping his fingers against the steering wheel, a subtle habit he indulged when on edge. At precisely 3:03 a.m., the highway dipped into a shallow valley. Reyes eased up on the accelerator, letting the cruiser coast. The headlights revealed a stretch of tarmac that appeared identical to all the miles he'd just traversed, a straight ribbon of gray, bordered by the vague silhouette of desert scrub. He spotted a road sign in the distance, its reflective surface catching the light. It read, "Next services 83 miles." A chill ran through him. He already knew services were scarce. It was part of why Route 50 was so infamous. But seeing the reminder at this exact moment, unsettled him in a way he couldn't fully articulate. Then just past that battered sign, something flickered across the highway. Initially, it registered as a vague silhouette, humanoid, perhaps. But the proportions were all wrong. The movement was too swift, too fluid. Before he could even tap the brakes, the figure vanished into the darkness on the opposite side of the road. His heart thumped heavily against his rib cage. The desert played tricks sometimes. Shadows thrown by the cruiser's headlights could appear elongated, distorted. It might have been a coyote or a mule deer crossing the road. Yet Reyes found himself slowing to a near stop, adrenaline pumping as he scanned the darkness beyond the guardrail. The wind moaned across the flat expanse, and the night's chill seeped through the window glass. He debated whether to investigate. Under normal circumstances, he'd assume it was wildlife. But something in the back of his mind gnawed at him, an insistence that what he had seen was not an animal. Its limbs were too long, almost spindly, and the way it moved wasn't a quadruped's gallop or a typical loping stride. It was something else. Finally, he eased the cruiser onto the shoulder, activated the hazard lights, and put the car in park. A swirl of gravel kicked up around the tires, dancing in the red glow of the taillights. He radioed in his position a quick routine check. "This is Officer Reyes, heading out to investigate possible pedestrian or wildlife crossing at mile marker." He paused, checking the gauge on his dash. Mile marker 170 on Route 50. No further assistance needed at this time. He didn't know why he felt the need to share that last part. Perhaps it was an attempt at reassurance to let dispatch know it was a standard check, though his heart still thumped from the burst of alarm. Dispatch simply acknowledged him with a crackle of static. No other units were in the vicinity. Stepping out of the cruiser, he was struck by how cold it felt, even for a desert night in early autumn. The wind had a biting edge, and it carried an odd scent. It reminded him of scorched metal, like the smell of overheated bricks, only sharper, more pungent. As he walked toward where he thought the figure had disappeared, his boots crunched on the shoulder's gravel. Each step felt magnified in the silence. He swept his flashlight beam across the scrub and cactus that dotted the roadside. His breath caught in his throat when he noticed tracks in the dust. At first, they seemed like footprints, though larger than any normal humans, with a stride that suggested something walking on two legs. But as he followed them, the pattern broke off into something else. A cluster of impressions, almost like a multi-limbed creature, might leave each step accompanied by smaller imprints around what would have been a heel. He crouched down, drawing the light closer. The impressions were deep, the dust disturbed in an uneven sprawl. Reyes felt his heartbeat accelerate. What in the world could have made these, he wondered? Could it be a bear? Unlikely bears weren't common in this particular stretch, and the shape was all wrong. A mountain lion. Also unlikely. These were distinctly not paw prints. Moreover, he'd seen plenty of animal tracks in his career. These were different. A sudden gust of wind made him jerk his head up. The wind carried that same metallic tang, more concentrated this time. Almost like hot iron or raw steel. He rose to his feet, shining his flashlight deeper into the brush. He didn't see anything or anyone, but the hair on his arms stood on end as a whispering hush fell over the desert. It was that quintessential silence that preceded something dreadful, like the lull just before a predator pounces. Methodically, he scanned the desert beyond the guardrail. The flashlight beam picked out the shapes of yucca plants and rocks. A barbed wire fence ran parallel to the road, several yards out, presumably to keep livestock from wandering onto the highway. Beyond that lay more open desert. Suddenly, he thought he saw a flash of movement. He shifted the beam quickly, but there was nothing. Just the pale shimmer of a rock face or a bit of trash. Reyes exhaled, steadying himself. The thought of calling for backup briefly crossed his mind, but he knew how it would sound. Saw some weird footprints might be an injured animal or something else. It was too vague to justify waking up the entire department. Besides, he was trained to handle unexpected encounters, human or animal, on his own. Still, an uneasy knot tightened in his stomach. He took a few more steps from the cruiser, scanning the ground. As he did, the wind died, leaving the night oppressively still. No crickets chirped, no distant coyote howls, nothing. The quiet pressed in on his eardrums, an almost physical pressure. His own breathing sounded thunderous, echoing inside his head. Then a distinct shift in the air. The odor intensified, strong, pungent, almost sulphurous. The flashlight began to flicker, and he tapped it, cursing under his breath. When it steadied again, he caught a glimpse of movement at the periphery of his vision, somewhere off to his left. Quickly he pivoted, shining the light in that direction. His beam landed on a shape, silhouetted and partially crouched, as if it had just advanced a step closer. Reyes froze. The figure stood at the edge of the asphalt, right where the short desert grasses ended. He could see it more clearly now. Tall, impossibly thin limbs, elongated in a way that defied normal human anatomy. A pale reflection shimmered where its eyes might have been, 2 pinpoints of cold luminescence that stared back at him with predatory focus. His mouth went dry, and he wanted to say something to issue a command like, "Police, don't move," but the words refused to form. The creature's stance was unnervingly poised, like an insect perched on the brink of darting forward. Its head jerked in small, abrupt movements, twitching from side to side in a manner that made Reyes's skin crawl. For a moment, neither he nor the thing moved. It felt like a standoff in the middle of nowhere, the only witnesses the silent desert and the one beam of the cruiser's headlights behind him. Time stretched, turning seconds into a slow, agonizing sprawl. Reyes knew he should retreat to the safety of his vehicle. It was the logical course of action. But he also felt a strange compulsion to stand his ground, to understand what he was seeing. Every fiber of his training told him this was no ordinary situation. At best, it was a deranged vagrant or a severely ill person in need of medical attention. At worst, he couldn't even begin to categorize what it might be. Some primal part of him recognized danger. Then the figure made a sudden movement, darting into the darkness on all fours. Or was it 6 limbs? Reyes couldn't tell. It moved in a blur, its silhouette a tangle of appendages. In a panic, he stumbled backward, nearly losing his footing on the gravel. His flashlight beam swung wildly, casting frantic arcs of light across the desert. By the time he steadied himself, the shape was gone. His breath came in ragged gasps, each exhalation a visible puff in the cold air. He realized that in the process of trying to keep the creature in sight, he'd stepped further away from his cruiser. Now it loomed behind him, taillights glowing red, like a beacon in the vast emptiness. Slowly, he backed toward the vehicle. His throat felt tight as he tried to steady his nerves. He had to call this in, at least get a second set of eyes out here to confirm he wasn't hallucinating. As much as he didn't want to sound paranoid, the memory of those elongated limbs and that unnatural gait was seared into his mind. With his heart hammering, he reached the cruiser and slipped into the driver's seat, locking the doors immediately. The interior light glowed briefly before he slammed the door shut, plunging him into darkness, lit only by the dash. He grabbed the radio, forcing calm into his voice. "Dispatch, this is Officer Reyes at mile marker 170 on Route 50, requesting backup." A burst of static, then a reply. Reyes come again. "You need backup." He swallowed, aware his voice might betray the tremor of fear. "Confirm. I've encountered an unidentified subject on the highway, possibly in distress. Need another unit on scene. Copy that. Nearest unit is at least 30 minutes out," the dispatcher informed him. There was a pause, and then the voice added, "Are you in immediate danger?" Reyes considered the question. He was safe for the moment in his locked cruiser, but the sense of looming threat remained. "Negative. Not immediate, but I'd appreciate assistance." "Understood. Hang tight. Unit 7 will head your way." He ended the transmission and exhaled slowly. The next half hour would feel like an eternity. His rational mind told him to keep the doors locked, remain in the car, and keep the headlights scanning the perimeter. He flicked the spotlight switch, and a brighter beam cut across the highway, illuminating the shrubs where he'd last seen the creature. Nothing moved there now, except wind-rustled branches. He debated turning on the cruiser's siren, or at least the overhead lights, thinking it might scare off whatever was out there. But that same inexplicable curiosity, mixed with professional duty, urged him to stay alert and observe to gather more information. After all, if he reported an unknown entity, he needed more details than it was tall and unnatural. He kept his left hand poised over the car's spotlight control, scanning the roadside in slow arcs. His right hand rested on his service weapon, still holstered but ready if needed. Over the next several minutes, the desert remained excruciatingly quiet. The wind had dropped to a mere whisper, and the only audible sounds were the low purr of the cruiser's engine and his own measured breathing. Minutes ticked by. It was 3:16 a.m. according to the dashboard clock when he caught movement again. Off to the right, near a cluster of Joshua trees, something flickered in the spotlight's edge. He jerked the beam toward it. This time, he saw it more clearly than before. The creature crouched low, face turned toward him. Whether it had hair or some chitinous shell he couldn't discern. Its shape was too bizarre, slim yet bulky at the joints, a silhouette that defied simple explanation. Slowly it rose up as if unveiling its full height easily over 7 feet tall. Then it took a step forward into the direct path of the spotlight. A hiss of static crackled from the cruiser's radio, sending a shiver down Reyes's spine. The creature's eyes glowed brighter in the beam. It was close enough that Reyes could make out the shape of its face, or rather the suggestion of features. If there was a mouth, it was hidden beneath folds of pale, leathery skin. The eyes, too, glistened with an unsettling intelligence. Time stood still again. Reyes felt frozen, transfixed. The rational part of his brain screamed, "Drive now." But he stayed an involuntary observer to this impossible tableau. Slowly, as if testing his reaction, the creature moved another step forward, its limbs swaying in a jerky, insect-like motion. A surreal clarity overtook Reyes. He was staring at something that should not exist. Finally, adrenaline surged enough to break his paralysis. He reached for the switch controlling the overhead lights and siren, jabbing it. The cruiser erupted in a frenzy of red and blue strobes, accompanied by the warble of the siren. The desert lit up in pulsing color, and the creature reacted violently, jerking its head back in what looked like pain or alarm. It let out a sound, a low, throbbing hum, that Reyes felt more than heard, reverberating in his chest, like the deep note of some monstrous organ. In an instant, it dropped to all fours, scuttling backward at alarming speed, until it vanished behind the slope of the terrain. The siren's wail echoed off distant rocks, and once again, the highway was empty as though the thing had never been there. Reyes's heart hammered against his ribcage. He pressed the button to kill the siren. The abrupt silence felt like a slap. Panting, he stared at the spot where it had just stood. He blinked, trying to convince himself that his eyes must have been tricked by the flickering beams and the stress of the situation. But the memory of that hum, like an electric charge, swirling around him, banished any notion of mere hallucination. "Dispatch Reyes," he said, voice cracking. He paused, forcing himself to sound calmer. "Be advised, subject fled the scene. I'll maintain position. Over." He heard the dispatcher's response through a haze. His thoughts raced. A check of the clock showed it was only 3:19 a.m. The backup wouldn't arrive until closer to 3:30, if not later. The minutes stretched ahead like an eternity in purgatory. He wiped sweat from his brow, though the night outside was frigid. For the next several minutes, Reyes fought the urge to simply gun the engine and drive away as fast as possible. He couldn't. It went against his training and duty to investigate. Moreover, a bizarre curiosity mingled with the terror, an inexplicable need to see if he could confirm just what was out there. The memory of those footprints, the elongated limbs, the unearthly hum, it all haunted him. Could it be some undiscovered species? The thought felt absurd, and yet confronted with the impossible, Reyes found himself struggling to find any rational explanation. At 3:25 a.m. he flicked the spotlight back to where he'd last seen the creature. Nothing. He swung the beam around, slowly scanning from the barbed wire fence to the cluster of Joshua trees over the battered road sign that read, "Next services 83 miles," and along the emptiness beyond. Still nothing. He was about to lower the light when the radio crackled to life. "Reyes, this is Officer Beck. I'm about 5 minutes out." The voice was steady, a lifeline in the darkness. Relief washed over him. "Copy, Beck," he replied, doing his best to keep his voice level. "I'll keep an eye out, pulling over at mile marker 170. The next 5 minutes passed in agonizing slow motion. He listened for any sign of the creature's return. Even the wind seemed to have died again, granting the desert a tomb-like hush. Reyes stared into the gloom until spots danced in his vision from the bright beam. A swirl of swirling dust near the guardrail caught his eye, but it turned out to be nothing more than an errant gust. Suddenly, headlights appeared in his rearview mirror. Relief surged. Another cruiser rolled to a stop behind him, and Officer Beck stepped out, casting her own flashlight around. Reyes got out of his cruiser, the presence of another officer lending him a courage he lacked moments before. Beck was a younger officer, but she carried herself with confident authority. "You okay?" she asked, scanning the desert with a critical gaze. He nodded, though he was anything but fine. Someone ran across the highway. I got out to check and... He trailed off, struggling to find a way to describe it without sounding unhinged. "I'm not sure what it was," he finally managed. Beck raised an eyebrow. "Maybe a hitchhiker on something potent." "You know how folks get out here sometimes?" Reyes shook his head vehemently. "No, this was different. I found footprints, or at least prints of something, larger than a person's, and it moved on more than 2 legs at times. I got a look at it in the spotlight. It wasn't human." He saw the flicker of skepticism in her eyes, the same look he would have given another officer telling this story. "Show me," she said, voice firm. They walked together along the shoulder where Reyes had found the tracks. Sure enough, they were there, disturbed patches of dust and scattered stones. But to his horror, the crisp impressions he'd seen earlier were smudged, as though deliberately brushed away. They could make out vaguely odd footprints, but nothing definitive. Could be anything, Reyes, Beck said gently, not accusing him of lying, but clearly uncertain. We see weird prints all the time out here. Coyotes stepping over their own tracks. Twisted wind patterns. Reyes clenched his jaw. No. It was clearer earlier, like something had 5, maybe 6 digits on each foot. Or hand. He inhaled sharply. The smell, it was metallic like hot iron. Did you catch that? Beck shook her head. All I smell is sage and dust. She panned her flashlight over the desert. Look, we can sweep the area. But it's dark as a coal mine. If it's a drifter, they could be hiding anywhere. Reyes locked his gaze on the spot where he'd seen the creature. Nothing but black emptiness stared back at him. A wave of doubt crashed over him. Could his mind be playing tricks? But his racing heart and the vivid memories insisted otherwise. They spent the next 20 minutes combing the immediate vicinity, calling out a standard warning. Highway patrol. If anyone needs assistance, identify yourself. The only answer was the soft shuffle of feet on gravel. Their flashlights roamed over thorny shrubs, an abandoned tumbleweed, and occasional desert stones, but no sign of the creature or a person. Eventually, Beck put a hand on his shoulder. We've got nothing, Reyes. Let's call it in as a suspicious disturbance. If it was a person, they're long gone now. He nodded, defeated. The sense of dread still clung to him, though. A part of him expected the creature to re-emerge at any moment, lunging from the darkness with those impossibly long limbs. But the desert remained silent, as if complicit in hiding the thing that haunted it. They returned to their cruisers. Beck took one last look around, then spoke into her radio notifying dispatch of the situation. Dispatch acknowledged logging it as an unexplained sighting. The official line would be wildlife, or possibly a transient. Nothing to ring any alarm bells in the bigger system. Reyes felt an unsettling hollowness in his chest. He didn't want to be the paranoid officer with a monster story, but he also couldn't ignore what he'd witnessed. He was silent as Beck gave him a once-over, asking if he was sure he was okay. He mustered a tight-lipped smile, replying that he was fine. Just rattled. All right, she said, patting the hood of his cruiser. I'll follow you a few miles down the road. Make sure we don't see anything else. Then we'll both head back to the station. He nodded, grateful for the company. Together, the 2 patrol cars pulled back onto Route 50, their headlights carving parallel tunnels in the darkness. Despite her presence, Reyes couldn't shake the sensation that something was still watching from the depths of the desert. They drove in tense silence for several miles, the clock on Reyes's dash reading 4:07 a.m. By the time they reached a battered sign welcoming them to the outskirts of Austin, Nevada, Beck pulled alongside him at a wide turnout. He rolled down his window. She did the same. You going to be all right, John? She asked, using his first name for the first time that night. There was genuine concern in her voice. He nodded slowly, though he didn't fully believe it himself. I'll be okay. I know what I saw. His eyes drifted to the empty road behind them. Or at least I know it wasn't a normal person or animal. Beck hesitated. Listen, out here on Route 50, people get spooked. We see shadows, weird lights. Your eyes can play tricks, especially this late. No one's judging you. He forced a small laugh, more of a hollow exhalation. Thanks. You head in. I'll finish my route, she said. Get some rest, all right? He nodded again. With that, she pulled away, turning her cruiser back onto the highway. Reyes followed at a slower pace, his thoughts churning. She was just doing her job, trying to keep him from feeling embarrassed, from letting fear compromise his professionalism. But he couldn't shake the memory of that creature, the sense of cold intelligence in those glowing eyes. Back at the station, dawn was just beginning to lighten the horizon, a grayish hue seeping into the sky. He filed his report describing an unidentified individual or animal, omitting the more fantastic details. Even so, the other officers gave him sideways glances. One joked about too much coffee, another teased him about desert aliens. Reyes forced a smile, but inside he was reeling. Over the following weeks, Reyes avoided the night shift on Route 50 whenever possible. If assigned, he requested a partner. He never gave a detailed explanation, just said he preferred company out there. Some of the other officers chuckled, calling him jumpy. Yet a few older troopers who'd served decades on the highways and had their own inexplicable encounters merely nodded in understanding. They'd seen enough strange things over the years to reserve judgment. Sleep didn't come easily. Night after night, he relived that moment when the creature reappeared at the highway's edge. In his dreams, it would edge closer. Sometimes he'd awake drenched in sweat, convinced that it had followed him home, that those elongated limbs were scraping at his bedroom window. Months passed, and still the memory wouldn't fade. He spoke discreetly to a local rancher who claimed to have seen strange tracks near his property a few times. Another local insisted the desert was home to more than rattlesnakes and coyotes, pointing to legends that predated the highway's tales of shapeshifters and desert phantoms that roamed at night. Reyes wasn't sure he believed in shapeshifters, but the idea lingered all the same. Eventually, he started to share a measured version of his story, with the rookie officers cautioning them about traveling Route 50 alone in the dead of night. Most of them humored him with polite interest, and some indulged in conspiracy theories about cryptids. Nonetheless, Reyes's warning was sincere. If he could deter even one person from confronting the unknown alone, it was worth whatever mockery might come. Even after all that time, no one else in the department claimed a sighting like Reyes's. No official record existed of any creature matching his description. Yet every so often, a traveler passing through would call in a vague report of something crossing the highway, something they couldn't quite name. The calls were always dismissed as illusions or exhaustion. Reyes, however, suspected otherwise. In his final months before transferring to a quieter district, Reyes put in one last recommendation to the station's bulletin board. Heed the legends. Some nights, certain stretches of road belong to things we don't understand. He never explicitly mentioned the thing he'd seen, but he made sure the new recruits heard the caution. He'd tell them, "When it's past 3 a.m. and you're alone on Route 50, the darkness feels alive. You may think your headlights reveal everything. Trust me, they don't. If you see something that defies explanation, don't try to be a hero. Call for backup. Turn on your lights and siren. Sometimes it's better to scare it off than to confront it head-on." Most listened wide-eyed whether they believed or not. And when Reyes finally handed in his badge and keys at the Nevada Highway Patrol Station, he left with the knowledge that his warning might spare another officer or an unsuspecting traveler from encountering the nameless terror he'd witnessed on that moonless night. To this day, he refuses to drive that stretch of Route 50 alone, especially after midnight. If pressed about why, he offers a grim smile and a quiet admonition. Not everything out there is human. Sometimes you see things on the road that make you question reality. Believe me, some things are better left unseen. And the loneliest road in America remains just that. A dark, empty ribbon, where on a certain moonless night at 3 a.m., something not quite human crossed paths with a lone patrol car, leaving only half-erased footprints, a lingering metallic scent, and the indelible mark of terror on one man's mind.